So first off, thank you all for joining us today for this Q&A. We have a wonderful group of filmmakers here to participate. And first, I'd like to speak with Kara Blake, the director of COHABITAT, which is the first film in Strange Hours this year. Kara, your film is, according to your synopsis, an absurdist take on the concept of rewilding. I'm wondering if maybe you could help explain for our audience, what is rewilding and what does it mean to you in terms of where we're currently at with environmental conservation?
Well, the term rewilding essentially means letting nature run its course in an area. So urban areas that have had a lot of human intervention are given back to nature. So the plants and animals that perhaps were native to that area once come back and take over that area. And it was a term that I wasn't really familiar with until the pandemic. And it sort of arose in talking about how suddenly there were all these areas within cities that were no longer densely inhabited by humans or frequented by humans. So there was a lot less human traffic in areas. And what would happen to those areas? Would plants and animals start to, enter those areas and start to take over? And it sort of just provided a springboard for my imagination into how far would that go? Would animals be entering into our own homes? So that's where the sort of like absurdist take on it comes from. It started off like, maybe there'll be more raccoons in the neighborhood, or, but then I just kind of riffed on that and took it a bit further.
So it was something that came about in direct response to the pandemic. We often saw those memes or things shared on social media that said, nature is healing. And this kind of takes it to its sort of absurd extreme, in other words.
Yeah, where perhaps we can actually cohabitate with animals in a way that we don't currently. Animals that aren't, domesticated traditionally, like cats and dogs. Like perhaps we could have some kind of coexistence with like tigers, or I don't know. I mean, it's fully implausible, but it was just kind of imagining what if that could be a possibility.
I think there's a few people out there that would be willing to let a tiger, sleep in the bed and take a bath.
Yeah, isn't there a whole Netflix show about that?
I seem to recall. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kara. That was a great answer. Next, I would love to talk with Livia Belcea, the director of FAՈL, which is our local film in this program. How do you do, Livia?
I'm really good. How are you, Christopher?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you. One of the most memorable aspects of your film is that it concludes, sorry to give a slight spoiler, with a live duck being presented to the audience. Sort of going off of the animal theme, I guess, it is unusual to see a local film that makes use of a live animal that is not just a cat or a dog or something that we would traditionally domesticate. So I'm really wondering, from a filmmaking point of view, from a production point of view, how did you obtain access to a live duck, and what were some of the challenges of shooting with it on set?
Yeah, well, whenever you're shooting with animals, it's really challenging. And particularly for this film, I felt like I needed the duck to make the last shot possible. So the process was actually quite simple. I contacted a few individuals who were selling ducks on Kijiji and just explained to them what I was doing. And just asked them if I could pay the purchase price, but actually return the duck after the filming. And I had asked them for, sort of like the kind of duck that you would have on a family farm. So there was a really nice lady who contacted me back, and she said, absolutely, no problem. I'm happy to help you. My actress, actually, Masha Dubois, and I went to this farm with this cat crate. The duck was really easy to catch. We put it in the crate. And once we got back to my apartment, which is where we filmed FAUL, we realized that the duck had actually pooped all over itself and all over the crate. So we had to bring it into the bathtub. We let it chill for a little bit. We set the camera, we set the shot, we set the lighting, and I just opened the crate. I gave it a little bit of a with my shower head, a little bit of a wash. I let it chill. I grabbed a towel and I just wrapped it around the duck and I gave it to her. And I just said, just do the shot and let's just kind of pray that it's going to work. And the duck was super quiet, really chill. But actually, funny thing is, when my actress was waiting for me to bring this duck to her with this towel around it, she could hear it quacking. And she was giggling because she could hear the duck quack while I was trying to get it. And I actually have that. I have that on camera, so it's just funny to see her in her element, but also laughing at the quacking of the duck.
Wow. So, do I understand correctly that you can buy livestock on Kijiji?
Yes, and all sorts. I mean, from cows to ducks to pheasants to sometimes you can even find peacocks. I mean, it's as long as you have a farm, you can keep a duck. So, yeah.
Well, that's a whole new world. That's just been, my eyes have been opened up to. There's a black market for farm animals on Kijiji.
Well, I think it's legal, but yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Livia.
My pleasure.
My next question is for the co-directors of UNDARK, which is a beautiful dance film of this year's Strange Hours program. We have with us today Axel Robin and Melissa McCracken, co-creators of this film. And I want to ask you both about the real-life story that inspired the creation of the dance piece as well as the dance film that we watch, because I understand the dance came first and the film, or the idea to make the film, came second. And this is based on the real-life story of the Radium Girls. Maybe you could just explain a little bit for our audience what that story is and what inspired you to translate it into this art piece.
Sure. So I'll go ahead and explain the inspiration for that. I actually came across the story first a couple years ago as a BuzzFeed article. So it's kind of silly. You don't normally learn anything of real substance on BuzzFeed, but it really drew me in because it was so in depth in its explanation. And so basically during World War I, many young women were employed by radium factories. This is about 20 years or so after radium was first discovered by Marie Curie. And radium, when mixed with other chemicals, it glows. It forms a glowing substance. And so they were employed by these factories to paint watch dials with the radium paint so they would glow in the dark and help the soldiers see the time. And it was great. It paid really well, which was a wonderful thing for women at the time to be employed and to make their own money. So it gave them a sense of freedom and independence. And what they did is they adopted a practice of licking the paintbrush so that it would turn into a very fine point, since the dials and the numbers are so tiny. So after they would dip the paintbrush in and paint a stroke, they would lick the end and continue, and it would help actually save more paint. So it was more effective, costly. So without realizing the dangers of radium and with the whole world believing that it was a miracle drug, they were ingesting over months and years this toxic, life-threatening chemical. And so the story really drew me in for its actual terrifying and grotesque nature. As a choreographer and dance maker, I'm really interested in translating trauma, whether it's nature or body-based traumatic events. I'm really interested in how we can sort of embody those traumas and create either the same narrative or we learn something new about that narrative in our own bodies in the present moment. So I wanted to create a dance piece actually for my final year at Concordia University in the dance program. The pandemic, of course, hit just as I was about to get a really good start on it. So that became the idea to turn it into a film and have the camera be yet another witness to this slow, inevitable degradation of the body. And it was interesting to me how we could capture that on film.
Wow, that's a really interesting answer. Thank you so much, Melissa. And it's interesting because, as you say, it is quite a horrifying and grotesque real life story, and yet you've translated it into a film that is very aesthetically beautiful and at times quite poetic. So there's an interesting combination there. Axel, I'm wondering if you want to also, say something on this topic. What was it about this story of the Radium Girls that gave you the idea to want to make this film?
Yes. At first, Melissa came to me because she knew I was making films, and I had approached her earlier to create films, and she wanted to make a film out of the choreography, and so it interested me, and we agreed that we didn't want to make not a slasher, but a grotesque film with the story. We wanted to inspire ourselves of the story, but to make a film that was a little bit different. So we tried something that was a little bit not too much gruesome, more in the movement and the camera exploration than in the actual grotesque aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there is this very kind of kinetic and very fluid element to the choreography that we see on camera, the way that the camera records it, and of course the lighting, which starts off looking more or less neutral, but gradually sort of floods with this beautiful green light, is really quite something. So thank you very much, Axel, for that wonderful explanation. I would love to talk again with Kara Blake about COHABITAT at this point. Kara, there is one shot in your film that shows a crossword puzzle on the screen. And I'm always looking for clues in films like this as to what the filmmakers were intending. And it could be argued that maybe there are some hidden messages in this crossword puzzle, because some of the clues that we see spelled out or filled in the crossword puzzle are words like face mask, contaminated, and most provocatively of all, a dream within a dream. So what do some of these clues mean to you, and why did you decide to include them in the film?
Well, it's funny because those were the actual answers for that particular crossword. The New York Times crossword puzzle is always very au courant, and they, really incorporate clues and answers that are of the time. So we were thick into the pandemic, and that's why there are answers in there that are face mask and things like that. But dream within a dream was kind of my favorite answer in the crossword, and really sort of I felt was very fitting to that film. And I included that shot because the whole film was made in my home. It was part of an initiative called Greetings from Isolation, which was a group of Canadian filmmakers who were invited to create short films with whatever means they had at home during the pandemic on virtually no budget. And so the whole film was shot in my house, and the crossword is always there because I religiously do it every day. So I wanted it to be there also for the date, because it was really a particular moment in time. So I think it's cool to see that date there as well.
Absolutely. It gives the sense of a specific time and place and location and context to the work. It really kind of grounds it in the reality that we're all sharing right now. So that's really interesting. Thank you. My next question is for Cameron Carver, the director of CHOKABLOK. And I related to this film very strongly on a personal level. And I know some other members of our team did too, because we do a lot of work to put on this festival, and we're also all artists ourselves that sometimes work in film or video or other mediums that require the completion of a lot of complex tasks, and ones that we don't often receive a lot of instant gratification when they're done. So the journey of Chase, the protagonist of your film, going through this series of increasingly stressful tasks was very potent for us. And I'm wondering if it was perhaps inspired by your experiences as a filmmaker too.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think when we first started making the movie, or when we first came up with the idea, it was really about this feeling of like internalized capitalism almost, this hustle culture that we're all so a part of and that we're all sort of addicted to and kind of crave, and just interrogating why, like what's sort of at the end of it all. We keep working, we keep doing these menial tasks, especially during the pandemic. Felt like we were filling these days with like, how can we feel like we were accomplishing something, these busy bees. And I think, I don't know, like I know myself and a lot of artists that I know said that they found this amazing amount of space, these days, these huge, long, maybe weeks of like not really needing to or having to accomplish anything. And finally maybe connecting with something else, some sort of presence in their lives. So that's sort of where the film emerged out of this great amount of space. And then myself and my co-producer Poppy, we just sort of went, let's just make this thing absolutely from scratch. Like, let's write it, I'll write it, well, we'll produce it, we'll design it, we'll film it all in our house, and with our flatmate. And through the process of making the film, because there were so many things to do, we really started to feel like Chase. And I think like once a day would be like, why, like we are totally giving in to this feeling that we're trying to sort of highlight, that is not really, it's not really actually a productive feeling, but it was kind of inescapable because there were so many things that needed to get accomplished. So yeah, there was a huge amount of irony making that film, that a lot of the time we were just feeling as stressed as the protagonist was. Yeah.
That's very relatable and very interesting because, at first when you sort of start watching the film, it seems almost like there's this higher power that's kind of watching Chase and, maybe kind of adjudicating all of these tasks and perhaps monitoring him in some way. But it really turns out in the end that Chase is his own worst taskmaster. So
yeah,
thank you very much.
We all really are our own worst taskmasters, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's something that all of us as artists can relate to at some level. Thank you so much, Cam. My next question is for Livia, and I want to ask you another question about your film, FAWL. At the very end of the film, the protagonist, who has been sort of going through some kind of a internal or personal trial of some kind, comes across a rubber duck that is unlike the rest. This one is covered in glittery, sparkling jewels and rhinestones and looks kind of oddly beautiful. And she seems to come to some kind of internal realization of some kind when she encounters this special duck. What did that bedazzled or glittery duck symbolize or mean for you as a storyteller?
Yeah, well, I think I have to backtrack a little bit and talk about the concept with the ducks. And it came from, the saying to get your ducks in a row, which is essentially a very poetic way of saying just kind of getting your shit together. And I had this idea that it would be really funny to try to animate these, someone trying to get their ducks in a row, and they're literal ducks, and the ducks are taking over and they're becoming mischievous and malicious, and just how it was just kind of comical. And then this morphed into the film where the ducks that are overrunning the place and overrunning the protagonist are the endless possibilities that we're faced with. And at least for myself and possibly for others too, sometimes when you have too many choices, you're kind of paralyzed. It's difficult to make a choice. And I mean, really the idea of the duck that is different from all of the malicious ducks is that that duck represents that awareness, is that once you come into this awareness that you have all these choices and you decide to make one final choice and nurture that choice, then that will bring it to fruition. That's how the duck turns into a live duck. It actualizes itself. So it's really that awareness to make that choice, and that will essentially set you free from the burden of all the other possibilities that haven't actualized.
That's really interesting. We live in a society now that seems to have an almost infinite number of choices and selections for us to make. whether it's in clothing or food or shopping or even in TV programs to watch on Netflix. But it can be a very paralyzing thing to have too much choice or maybe the illusion of too much choice. So it's very interesting that your film comments on how we can find a solution and break through some of that paralysis. Thank you so much for that answer.
And if I may just add one last thing, it's also parallel with freedom. We see freedom often as the ability to do whatever we want and to have all these choices, but freedom can be found in making one choice that actually boxes us, but that can represent freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Livia.
Thank you.
My next question is for Axel and Melissa, and this is about your film UNDARK. And this is an extremely nerdy question on my part because this is the kind of thing I focus on when I watch films. I'm always looking for the technical aspects of it too, in addition to the emotions of the story and the characters. And I couldn't help but notice that your film UNDARK is presented in a very unusual aspect ratio. Most of the times when we see a more or less square frame in a movie, it's a 4:3 and is therefore slightly rectangular. But in your case, you chose to place this character inside of a perfectly square frame, inside of a 1:1 aspect ratio. What was the reasoning behind that creative choice, and what kind of an effect do you think it has on the audience seeing?
Well, I can answer. Like, it was for symbolic as well as technical and practical reasons. For the symbolic part, it was to give the less space possible to like the character and the dancer like in the frame.
Mm-hmm.
And also like as it goes, we try to like fragment the body with the camera and the montage. So with the 1:1, it's like the less large ratio, it was easier to like fragment and go like number by number, like image by image.
Mm-hmm.
And for a practical reason, it was to give us the most space possible for the lights to be like close to the dancer without seeing it in the screen. So it was like was just the best choice for the
Interesting. Wow, thank you so much. Melissa, did you find that working inside of that smaller frame impacted your dance and your choreography? Did you have to restrict your movements as well?
Well, this is maybe my second film ever, and definitely my first time becoming more involved in the technical aspects. I felt like a student the whole time because I was learning as we were filming and discussing those aspects. And we talked about how we wanted the proximity to really affect the viewing and my performance. So watching it kind of the first time we're going through the editing process, that really impacted my experience watching it, of just how confronting it is and how we almost wanted it to look like it was happening in a void. Like it's not happening in a specific setting. It's not happening in a dark space. It's actually just happening in this in this void is the best way I can put it, so that you just feel very confronted with the light, with the passing of time, and with the body. So it just kind of places you in this like a little uncomfortable void as you watch it. And we were actually quite limited. I was limited with space. The studio we shot in was quite boxy in itself, so it kind of helped. And my movements were very stationary, and that also kind of helped. I enjoy working with restrictions a lot in the space because it tends to bring out something very visceral in the movement when you don't have the luxury of flying across the room or transferring your weight and tossing your body. You start to feel things from the inside when you have nowhere to go. So I think it really helps translate that part of the story of these women suffering in this tiny 1:1 frame, is they had nowhere to go, and you really witness their deterioration from the inside.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for that illuminating answer, both of you. And just congratulations on doing such a brilliant job on making a film that is so emotionally disturbing and also involving. And what you mentioned just there, Melissa, kind of reminded me of some of Livia's previous comments about how working within restrictions or having more limitations can sometimes be a very freeing thing for an artist. So very interesting comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, I'd like to ask another question for Cameron Carver, the director of CHOKABLOK. one of the things that we loved about your film was the visual design. I am a big nerd for production design in movies. It's one of my favorite things to pick apart and study. And I couldn't help but notice that CHOKABLOK has a very specific color scheme. There's a lot of blue, not just in Chase's costume, but even on the walls. And things like the tasks that he's working on have been kind of graphic designed in a certain way in terms of their branding. And there's also even food in Chase's pantry that looks as if it was all produced by one kind of monolithic company, which we found so thought-provoking. You know, there's so many details beyond the spoken dialogue that can kind of help fill in where the universe of the movie takes place. So how did the visual look of your movie develop?
Yeah. Well, I'll first and foremost say that at the point that we made that film, it was the height of lockdown in the UK. So we were not meant to leave the house. So the entire thing is set in our house. So when we were writing the script, we were thinking, okay, like where could we shoot this scene? What have we got around? So that was sort of the very first seedling. And then I think as it developed, we really wanted to create a world that almost felt like it was like post-apocalyptic, or like as you described, as though it was an environment where someone was being watched. So it felt quite, almost felt quite strange. And the primary colors really wanted to it really create this childlike feeling. So, you know, even though Chase is a full-grown adult, all of the tasks that he's doing feel like they're quite related to this innocence. And yeah, again, like the whole film is sort of asking the question, like, how are we affecting this very innocent consciousness? Like, how are we clouding that consciousness? And so bringing it, surrounding it with all of those colors and those things just help to kind of like simplify and clarify that. I also, what did I say here? Yeah, we use a lot of symbols as well. So I really like video games, and the whole thing kind of simplifies down into these kind of this like level system, I suppose. And the graphics and all those things, they're definitely inspired by, this sort of video game leveling up system.
That's really interesting because I am also a video game enthusiast, and I can frequently get locked into the kind of, I guess you'd call it like it's kind of an endorphin release that happens when you see the little bright sparkly words come up on screen that says, you know, you've reached level 34, and you think, oh boy, I did it. Now on to level 35. And there's no end to it.
Just sort of never stops, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's really interesting. Thank you so much, Chase. We are out of time for right now, so I want to just thank all of the artists that joined us in this Q&A. Thank you very much for your comments and your insightful commentary. Really learned a lot about your filmmaking practice and had deeper and better appreciation and understanding of your films now too, and I'm sure the audience watching at home does as well. So thank you all very much for attending today.
Thanks, Christopher.